Now that you have finished reading Cask of Amontillado, we are going to go through some final thoughts on this chilling story of revenge. First of all, this is not your typical murder mystery. We're not trying to figure out who committed this crime because the narrator, Montresor, literally tells us that he is going to murder Fortunato in the first two paragraphs of the story. The mystery, therefore, is why he commits this heinous act of revenge. Now, as we go through this presentation and as we talk through some final thoughts, hopefully it sheds light on a possible motive for his revenge. He tells us very early on, "The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge." So we're told that the revenge seems necessary in Montresor's mind because Fortunato has insulted him in some way. And we'll go ahead later in this presentation and talk about what that possible insult may have been. So before we discuss motive, we're going to talk about the significance of Carnival. So just as a quick reminder, this was a time of celebration. People would eat a lot, drink a lot, and it was a time before Lent where people would celebrate because they were about to start fasting and sacrificing. So it was very similar to what we would see as Mardi Gras today. Now, during carnival season, social hierarchy falls by the wayside, and here I put kind of, because obviously you have the wealthy and the poor, but at this time, the wealthy could dress as a peasant or they can dress in any way they want, and even people who were normally seen as lower class or poor could play a significant role in the carnival celebration. Also, there's some significance in their costumes. So Fortunato is in a jester costume, or this costume of a fool, and Montresor is in an all-black cape with a mask, almost resembling either the Grim Reaper or an executioner. Now, another interesting point that we get at the end of the story and throughout while they're weaving in and out of the catacombs is it keeps on mentioning the ringing of Fortunato's bells on his cap. And the significance here is then that back in Poe's time, wealthy people used to tie a string around their arms when they're buried, and then that string would be attached to a bell that was at the surface because people deeply feared being buried alive, so the bell was meant to alert people if they were buried alive. Now, the irony here is that Fortunato is literally getting buried alive, but nobody is going to hear that bell. So again, it's opposite of what is expected of the ringing of the bells once one has been buried. That would indicate somebody is still alive and needs to be rescued. In this case, we know that Fortunato is going to remain in the catacombs because Montresor tells us at the end that nobody has disturbed the bones for 50 years. Now, we discussed irony a lot in class, but that's going to be our next important reminder and point here, is that this whole story utilizes irony and utilizes it to build suspense. So right off the bat, Poe establishes dramatic irony because we know Montresor plans to kill Fortunato. However, Fortunato has no idea. And because we know he's going to kill Fortunato, it builds some suspense because, yes, we know he's going to do it, but we don't know how, we don't know when, and we don't know why. So it's creating this sense of suspense in the reader because we're constantly wondering, well, why is he doing this? How is he going to do this? We also see a lot of verbal irony throughout. Much of what Montresor says is the opposite of what he means. Here's an example of both dramatic and verbal irony within the story. "Come," I said with decision, "we will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucchesi." "Enough," he said. "The cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough." "True, true," I replied. All right, so first of all, we know that this is dramatic irony because we know that Montresor is plotting to kill Fortunato. Fortunato doesn't know in this scene. And as a result, we also see a lot of verbal irony because Montresor is saying things when he in fact means the opposite. So he says things like, your health is precious. But we as the reader know he does not think his health is precious. He wants him dead. We also see that he says, we will go back, you will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Again, irony here, he intends to be responsible for Fortunato's death. So him saying, I cannot be responsible here is ironic. And then again, because we know what's going on here, certain lines take on different meaning. So it says, the cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough. True, true, I replied. So again, Montresor knows that Fortunato is not going to die of a cough. He's going to die at Fortunato's hands. At this point, Montresor's hands. At this point, we don't know exactly what Montresor has planned and what he's going to do to murder Fortunato just yet, but we know that he intends to kill him. So this true here, whereas Fortunato thinks he's just saying like, oh yeah, you'll be fine. We know that he's meaning, oh yeah, I know you won't die of a cough because I'm going to kill you. All right, now we're really going to get into possible motives for murder, and we're going to start by looking at the social status. Now, some of these things you may not have picked up on or you may have missed because culturally we don't have the same social norms that they did back when Poe wrote this. So just so we are all on the same page, it seems like Montresor has good family lineage. Now, the way we can tell this is, one, his vaults are extensive. So his family's catacomb goes on and on and on and on, which means he comes from this great and numerous family, as he himself describes. And clearly he is well off, and his family had been well off. However, it seems like Fortunato has a higher status currently. Some things we can use to determine this. One, numerous times throughout the story, there's reference to one of the characters grabbing the other character's arm. Let's take a look at an example. So here's a line at the beginning, right before they head to the catacombs. It says, thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelature closely about my person. I suffered him to hurry me to the palazzo. Now, just as a point of social etiquette at this time, it would have been seen as entirely inappropriate for somebody of lower class who wasn't a part of the aristocracy to grab someone of higher class or more noble origin. Now, we're going to see that Montresor thinks he is of more noble origin than Fortunato, and we could probably take his word for that. Again, we see how extensive his catacombs are. We know that his family has a coat of arms. So there's numerous signs that Montresor comes from this very noble family. However, clearly Fortunato, in grabbing Montresor by the arm, thinks he is of either equal status or higher status than him. And clearly Montresor is opposed to this. So he says things like, he possessed himself of my arm and I suffered him to hurry me back to the palazzo. So he, in this moment, feels like Fortunato is disrespecting him by grabbing him by his arm and leading him to his own house. Here's another instance where Fortunato grabs his arm. So it says, he again took my arm and we proceeded. These vaults, he said, are extensive. The Montresors, I replied, were a great and numerous family. I forget your arms. A huge foot adorned in a field of azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel. So there's a lot to unpack here. So first of all, we see Fortunato again grabbing Montresor's arm. And he uses words like, he took my arm. And we also see that for the first time, Fortunato is acknowledging that these vaults are extensive. So he's realizing in this moment how profound these catacombs are, which represents that the Montresors were this great numerous family, as Montresor points out here. However, we notice the past tense of were being used here, implying that they're no longer great and numerous as they once were. It also is a slap in the face that Fortunato doesn't even remember Montresor's family's coat of arms, which if he was a prominent figure in society currently, Fortunato should remember his family's coat of arms. And again, this might be something that Montresor takes offense to. Like, how dare you not know my family's coat of arms? Now, the last example I'm going to point out about the grabbing of the arm is here, where Montresor says, I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. So here he's saying, like, I was bold and I was the one now asserting my dominance over him. Like, I was showing him I believed myself to be of more noble origin and to be of higher status. Speaking of the coat of arms, we talked in class about how the coat of arms itself, so this golden foot stepping on a snake and the snake biting the foot and the heel. We talked about how this could be a metaphor for the two characters. And we know that the saying is, or the motto is, nobody injures me with impunity. So nobody harms me and gets away with it. Now, if this in fact is the family motto, this can give us some more insight into why Montresor ends up deciding to kill Fortunato. Maybe Fortunato has insulted his family in some sort of way, or maybe in Montresor's mind, just the fact that Fortunato feels as though he is above Montresor and that his status is higher than Montresor's, maybe he sees that as an instance where Fortunato is disrespecting his family and his family's name. And if he's grown up in this family that has the motto of nobody harms me or injures me and gets away with it, maybe he feels like Fortunato has disrespected his family and he feels justified in what he does by the end of our story. Last thing I'm going to mention with social status is the Freemasons. So clearly in this story, Fortunato is a member of the Freemasons. And this is a secret society made up of a number of prominent men. And he throws out a hand signal that only somebody who is part of this secret society would know. Montresor doesn't understand it because he's not part of the Freemasons. Just again, this is probably another slight in Montresor's mind because he is left out of this secret society or this group. And so he mocks the group by pulling out a trowel, which masons use, like masons, the actual bricklayers, use to like build a wall or build and construct things. So he's poking fun at this Freemason group secret society. But this is just another instance where we see that Montresor is not part of this upper class society. He's not really relevant in society anymore as his ancestors used to be. So that brings us to our final point. What was the motive? Was it family pride? So was he just following through with his family motto of nobody injures me and gets away with it? Did Fortunato insult his family and his family status? Is he just upset that Fortunato seems to have got his money more recently and doesn't have as prominent or noble of a family as Montresor has, that Montresor came from? Could it also have anything to do with the men's connoisseurship in wine? So we know that both men take pride in their ability to distinguish fine wine. To help answer this or give us something to think about, let's take a look at an essay titled The Motive for Murder in the Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. It's an essay by Elena Barban. Now, in this essay, she's talking a little bit about how Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from sherry. That comment is being made. And in reality, Amontillado is a type of sherry. So here's how she interprets that. She says, rather than considering Fortunato's words, Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from Sherry. As an author's heir, it is critical to view them as subtle means of characterization of Fortunato as unworthy of his reputation of a connoisseur in wine. So basically what she's saying here is this wasn't a mistake by Poe. Poe was trying to show us that Fortunato was in fact a quack. He didn't really know the difference between Amontillado and sherry, that they're in fact the same thing. Amontillado is just a type of sherry. Apparently, Fortunato does not know that Amontillado is a sherry. The reader can actually hear the mistake, which is otherwise unheard in a dialogue, namely that Fortunato capitalizes on the word sherry and uses it as a proper name rather than a generic term for several varieties of wine. Fortunato's mistake conveys his ignorance and his arrogance. So maybe that's part of it too, right? Maybe Montresor just sees Fortunato as this fake of somebody who is gaining attention in society, who people respect in society, and he clearly doesn't think Fortunato deserves that status. He sees him, much like that jester costume he's wearing, he sees him as this fool rather than somebody to be respected and admired. So, does Montresor get his revenge? Remember, he tells us in order to get good revenge, the seeker must not suffer in any way, and that includes guilt. Do we think he feels guilty at the end based on the things he says on the last page? So, like, may he rest in peace, the fact that he has to force the brick in. Or does he seem satisfied with what he's done? Some people think that this is a story of a man admitting to something or confessing to something on his deathbed. Is that the case? Is he remorseful? Or is he telling this story and reveling in this story of how he was able to defend his family name and get revenge on somebody he felt injured him? Poe leaves that up to us to decide. So as you think through that, look at details from the text, look at what he says throughout the story and at the end of the story to determine whether or not you feel like he actually got his revenge. That's all for today. If you have any questions, make sure you're reaching out to your teacher.